Border funding battle. Lawmakers passed $4.5 billion to help immigrants. We have a report and analysis. Faith and freedom. President Donald Trump stands up for religious liberty and pro-life issues. We're at the White House with a recap. Middle East peace. The Trump administration unveils its plan for economic stability in the region, why it's already run into opposition. And a big-time discovery. Good news for restoration efforts at Notre Dame Cathedral. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 26, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A photograph of a drowned father and 23-month-old daughter shocks the Pope, American lawmakers, and the world. The horrific image shows the bodies of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughter Valeria lying in the shallow banks of the Rio Grande. The image comes just hours after the Senate passes a billion-dollar bill, and last night a House passed one to help migrants detained at the border. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports.
Lauren, reaction pours in. Lawmakers call for change. Some say something finally has to happen on immigration and the border. But more than a dozen years, Congress has not been able to reach consensus on broad immigration reform. A warning, some of the images you're about to see are graphic and heartbreaking.
Daughter, mom, and dad left El Salvador on April 3rd. His mom says he wanted to work in the U.S. to raise enough money to build a home. Instead, the photo of their deaths along the southern border's Rio Grande. It's sparking more outrage in Washington on both sides of the aisle.
It's a horrible picture.
My heart breaks and my stomach turns.
We need to stop people from taking this journey and try to make life better in their homes.
When you look at this photograph of this father and his daughter who drowned, trying to come to this country, you understand the desperation of these people.
And at the Vatican,
Felicitar a los mexicanos.
A spokesman says Pope Francis was saddened by the drownings. A top Border Patrol chief says agents risk their lives every day to keep up with the surge. Last month, they caught 133,000 migrants.
Yesterday, I saw our agents in Carrizo Springs jump out of the water, save a 13-year-old child who was unconscious, give him CPR, give him mouth-to-mouth, and essentially bring him back to life.
Missouri Republican Josh Hawley accuses Congress of failing its duty.
Until this wretched Congress decides to do something, I don't know why we even bother to have these hearings. I don't know why it even matters, because this Congress will not act. This Congress refuses to act, and it's a complete dereliction of duty.
I'm saying that photograph ought to catalyze us, and we ought to try something different and start trying to solve the problem, okay?
Last night, the House did act, approving $4.5 billion to help take care of migrants at the border.
This bill does not fund the administration's failed mass detention policy. Instead, it funds effective, humane alternatives to detention that have a proven record of success.
Now, the Senate just passed their own version. The president and Speaker Pelosi are negotiating. The White House threatened to veto the original House version, saying the House was trying to restrict the power of the administration. Now, money to care for migrants detained at the border is quickly running out. And Lauren, tomorrow the bodies of the father and daughter are expected to be flown back to El Salvador.
Just tragic. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you so much. President Trump is also weighing in on this picture. He claims Democrats are to blame because they want open borders, which leads to migrant deaths. White House correspondent Mark Irons asked the president about it.
Does the photo of the drowned immigrants cause you to rethink any of your policies?
Well, that's like I've been saying. If they fixed the laws, you wouldn't have that. People are coming up. They're running through the Rio Grande. It can be a very rough river of sorts. I mean, there are times when going across the Rio Grande is very, very dangerous.
Joining me now is Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Theresa, welcome back to our broadcast.
Glad to be here, Lauren.
The human toll, that's really what this picture shows. And according to the Border Patrol figures, 283 people died along that southwest border in 2018. Nearly 100 of those deaths were in the Rio Grande, and that number is holding those deaths this year. So what is to be done? I know you think you have a solution.
Well, there's a lot of things that need to be done. One thing I will say is that it is absolutely a tragedy. Those deaths that are reported at Border Patrol are the ones we know about. There are probably many more that we don't. And I think what you heard the senator say is it does talk about the desperation of the migrants to get to the United States. First and foremost, we need to take care of the migrants that are coming now. The conditions in which they're out at the border, even the Border Patrol admits that they are not in facilities that were meant to handle families and children. They are way overcrowded, and that's what Congress is considering. So that's first and foremost. But secondly, we need some additional help and authorities. There hasn't been the kind of coordination among all the government agencies that's usually needed when you have a humanitarian crisis such as a natural disaster. FEMA hasn't been involved at that level. There are other things that we can do to try to address that.
Well, we keep hearing so much about the squalor, the condition for these children being housed in these government facilities, and you're saying that there isn't management at the top about how to help them. We've heard reports of volunteers showing up with donations, but they can't be accepted. Is that?
Yeah, that's one of the things. The government is not allowed to accept private sector donations in most cases. So the government has this thing that says that a law that says that they can't spend money, and that includes donated money or things that haven't been appropriated by Congress. So Congress appropriates the money and then they can spend it. The only exception to that is in the result of a natural disaster. FEMA does have specific authorities.
There you go.
Yes.
So now you're saying if FEMA gets involved, the organization that helps with hurricanes and providing aid and disaster relief, that then maybe that is something that could help them. Let's talk about Wayfair workers. They walked off the job today in protests over sales of beds to border centers. You can see them here. They say they're voting their conscience by saying that Wayfair should not be sending these beds to the border.
Well, I think there's a conflation between what's known as Immigration Customs Enforcement or ICE detention, which is where migrants that after they leave the border area sometimes are held, and what's going on there. And you heard members of Congress talk earlier about not funding detention, but that's different than when CBP encounters people immediately. Yeah, Border Patrol, they encounter these people immediately after crossing. They have to have some place to put them for the length of time it takes for that initial processing. This is not ICE, this is not detention, this is just some place to house them, and the facilities they have are not meant for families and kids. They don't have beds. So while I might sympathize with the desire to address the longer term detention needs, right now sending beds to the border so these kids have a place to sleep might not be a bad idea.
Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller will testify publicly before Congress on July 17th following a subpoena from House Democrats. The House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees will question Mueller separately about his 22-month investigation into President Trump and 2016 Russian election interference. President Trump reacted to news by tweeting 2 words: presidential harassment. And President Trump warns evangelicals if they vote for the wrong person in 2020, pro-life gains made under his administration could quickly change. He made his appeal to the Faith and Freedom Coalition in Washington, D.C. today. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Evangelicals are among some of the president's most loyal advocates. A recent Pew Research poll puts their approval rating at 69%. The same poll shows only 52% of white Catholics who attend Mass weekly support President Trump, but today the president claimed he's accomplished a lot for all Christians.
We're proudly defending the sanctity of life.
President Trump defends the unborn during a speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition.
And just last month, our administration ended federal funding of fetal tissue research.
The president listed his pro-life accomplishments and criticized Democrats for supporting late-term abortion.
Every child, born and unborn, is made in the holy image of God, and that is why I have asked Congress to prohibit the late-term abortion of babies.
He is a pro-life president. We have seen what he has done since he came in the office.
A Catholic nun praised President Trump and prayed for the protection of unborn babies during her invocation before his speech. The president says he supports religious sisters and others to make sure they can follow their faith.
We're protecting the conscience rights of doctors and nurses and teachers and groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor. We're with them.
The Faith and Freedom Coalition says it will attempt to register 1 million Christians in battleground states across America. Conservative activist Ralph Reed runs the organization, giving his backing to President Trump.
To give Christians a voice in government again.
Meanwhile, Democrats running for president will also try to mobilize the faith-based voting bloc. Self-proclaimed Christian and openly gay Democratic hopeful Mayor Pete Buttigieg has posted a faith engagement director position on his campaign website.
Now, the president left the White House this afternoon for Japan, where he'll attend the G20 summit with other world leaders. He'll also make a stop in South Korea to discuss North Korea's nuclear program. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, you've been busy today. Thank you. Tonight is the first primary debate for Democrats running for the White House. 10 candidates will take the stage in Miami with another 10 tomorrow. Those debating on the first night include Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and former Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke. To qualify, candidates needed either 65,000 unique donors or to be polling at or above 1% in 3 approved polls. We'll have a recap of the debate tomorrow night. The lone abortion clinic in North Dakota files a federal lawsuit over 2 laws. One measure requires doctors to tell women they can reverse a medical abortion if they have second thoughts. The other defines the unborn baby as a living human being. The lawsuit says it believes both bills force doctors to lie. And President Trump says he hopes the U.S. will not go to war with Iran, but if there is military conflict, he says America's use of force would be overwhelming. The president's comments follow the Secretary of State's visit to India today, where Mike Pompeo is hoping to get their support in putting more economic pressure on the Islamic Republic. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Pompeo says both the United States and India agree Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror and that the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf needs to be kept open. Both issues have been front and center as the Secretary of State continues his week-long foreign trip. He's aiming to build a global coalition to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
I think there's a shared understanding of threat and a common purpose to ensure that we can keep energy at the right prices and deter this threat.
Secretary Mike Pompeo stressed cooperation with India today during his high-profile meeting with the country's recently re-elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Foreign Minister. Secretary Pompeo's Indian counterpart highlighted the importance of fighting terrorism together.
I took the opportunity to express our appreciation for the strong support that we have received from the Trump administration. What we see is really zero tolerance for cross-border terrorism.
Both of them downplayed their country's growing disagreements over trade and tariffs, arguing the U.S. and India can work through their issues. Officials in India say their economy has taken a hit since May, when they agreed to a U.S. request to stop buying oil from Iran. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have been at an all-time high this month after Iran shot down a $110 million U.S. drone in the Persian Gulf. The new acting defense secretary, Mark Esper, also blames Iran for an attack on 2 commercial oil tankers.
Iran has to be held account for its actions. Look, one of the things that we need to defend is the principle of freedom of navigation. And that's not just for the United States, but that's for all members of the international community.
Esper took the U.S. concerns with Iran to NATO allies in Brussels today. He wanted the members of the military alliance to support any range of activities to help deter conflict with Iran.
Iran remains the top foreign policy concern right now, but it's not the only one. On Friday, Secretary Pompeo will join President Trump at the G20 summit in Japan. There, they plan to work with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on efforts to denuclearize North Korea. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. The Trump administration unveils its $50 billion economic peace plan in the Middle East.
To be clear, economic growth and prosperity for the Palestinian people are not possible without an enduring and fair political solution to the conflict, one that guarantees Israel's security and respects the dignity of the Palestinian people.
And that announcement came from Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and advisor. He's in Bahrain, but leaders from Palestinian territory say they will reject the proposal because it does not include a political resolution to the long-running conflict with Israel. Coming up, an EWTN project in Africa receives a special blessing. In mid-August, EWTN will launch Aussie Africa, a new Catholic news service based in Kenya. Today, Editor-in-Chief Father Don Bosco and EWTN's Ursula Marua received a very special blessing by the Holy Father. Father Don Bosco Anyala, who will be the head of Aussie Africa, joins us from Rome. Father, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you. Glad to have me back.
What did you learn from your meeting with the Holy Father today that will help you with the launch of Aussie Africa in mid-August?
This morning at the general audience at the Vatican, I had the privilege to have the Pope give me his apostolic blessings with the sign of the cross on my forehead. And I was holding also his hands for about 15 seconds. This to me is a great blessing ahead of the ministry that I have of SCI Africa. I had Ursula explain to the Holy Father what SCI Africa will be doing in Africa and my own background as a Kenyan but incarnated in South Sudan, and the Pope reacted with a smile and with the blessings.
Well, that's
so
wonderful.
I carry back to Africa special blessings from my visit at the Vatican.
And Ursula works with EWTN News as well. You know, you also met Cardinal Sarah from Guinea. What did he tell you about the impact Aussie Africa will have on the Church's work in Africa?
My meeting with Cardinal Sarah brought a very specific aspect to SCI Africa. He emphasized the need of bringing out authentic, realistic stories about Africa, stories that are positive, that can bring hope. He was concerned that in the previous times, stories from Africa have been negative and sometimes fake. So he was very emphatic. He emphasized on the need to bring out positive stories and said he hopes that SCI Africa would do exactly that.
Well,
positive stories from Africa.
As you prepare to launch, what is the need for this kind of outreach?
The need is because of the gap, because of the silence of the African voice, both within Africa and within the Universal Church. So SCI Africa is going to play the role of bringing out the voice of the laity, the clergy, the religious, the bishops of Africa, within Africa itself and to the Universal Church. This has been missing.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a very crucial moment in the Catholic Church in Africa. It's growing, isn't that right, Father?
It is growing. It is described as the future of the church. It is the hope of the Catholic Church. And indeed, there are realities in Africa that are unique to the Universal Church. The church attendance is high. The faith is growing. Missionaries have recorded high numbers of converts and faith and believers. So this is significant for the Universal Church.
Thank you so much. Father Don Bosco Anyala, the head of Aussie Africa. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Up next, a group of Catholics held a prayer rally outside a library in Maryland. We'll tell you why. And wait a second, there's good news for Notre Dame Cathedral. Should public libraries be off limits when it comes to holding events that expose young children to stories about gender identity? That's the question being asked in communities across the country as more and more libraries are being used as sites for, quote, drag queen story hour. Last Sunday, my next guest led a group of Catholics and other Christians to pray outside her public library in Lexington Park, Maryland, while such a story hour was being held inside. Joining me now is Georgia Kijesky, founder of Personhood Maryland, a pro-life group in the state. Georgia, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.
Well, thank you for being here. Why was it so important for you to take this stand? And congratulations, by the way, you're expecting your fifth.
Thank you. Well, I find that men dressing like women confuses children about their sexuality. And I feel that confusing children about their sexuality is a form of child abuse. And so as a mom, I felt it was very important for me to take this stand.
A mom of 4 or 5, I guess, if we could say. Okay. So we checked with the American Library Association, and it says on its website that the decisions about programming are being made at the local level, but it says ALA, through its actions and those of its members, is instrumental in creating a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive society. So what do you say to the ALA and others who say events like these promote tolerance?
Well, I would say that is not exactly true. This isn't about tolerance, this is more about confusion. And as we all know, the allure of tolerance can be very dangerous, especially when it comes to a human person. They are destroying we are witnessing through these events the destruction of the human person by confusing children about their human sexuality. Again, this is a form of child abuse, and it absolutely must not be tolerated.
There's some people, though, who would say, look, the libraries are taxpayer funded, right? If you don't want to see it, don't go.
Right.
What's your advice to people, though, listening who want to do what you're doing to stop this kind of thing in your community?
Well, as far as if we don't like it, don't go, it has much more to do with it than that. We as taxpayers don't have the freedom to not pay our taxes. So we are being held hostage in a way, in that sense. And so I would say to people who are looking to try to stop this, the libraries are not promoting this on their website, so you have to find it. You have to go out and seek it out. You have to go look in your newspapers, go look on bulletin boards around town. They're finding ways to get this in, and people have to be 10 steps ahead. One of the ways to be 10 steps ahead is to know how your library is being operated. Who are your library board? Who's running the show there first? And then you'll know who to go to afterwards. But we absolutely must resist this movement to confuse our children.
In your rosary prayer group that you assembled on Sunday, what were people praying for?
They were praying really for the parents of these children who were, dereliction of duty to protect their children from such confusion. And we were also praying for the people there, and we were praying in reparation, really, for the sacrilege, because what's happening is scandalizing. This is scandalizing people. So we were praying in reparation for the scandal being caused as a result of these events.
Thank you so much, Georgia Kijesky, founder of Personhood Maryland.
Thank you, Lauren.
Finally tonight, good news in the restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral. You almost could say it's about time. A clock nearly identical to the one destroyed in the fire last April has been found in storage. The duplicate was discovered at the Church of the Holy Trinity in Paris. It's being called a miraculous discovery and brings new hope to the restoration efforts at Notre Dame, one of the most famous churches in the world. What great news. It is about time. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.